Ja, meine Damen und Herren.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to welcome you very warmly for this cooperation event. I'm Dirk. I'm working at the Academy. I'm based in Kaiserslautern in the Rhineland-Palatinate, beautiful Rhineland-Palatinate, the most transatlantic federal state of Germany, with more than 50,000 Americans living here. And I have the honor to welcome you and to invite you to this discussion round, shall I say. Now, please, before we really start, I would like to introduce our partners of the Naumann Foundation and in particular also the representatives for this panel. And I would like to thank you for this great cooperation. And in our Atlantic Academy, we are dealing very much with the effects of the Russian aggression on Ukraine, also with the implications for our transatlantic relationships, and of course also the implications for Germany. And certainly the attack of Russia on Ukraine has changed the discussion in Germany about its own ability to defend itself, but also within the NATO alliance. But the effect of the Zeitenwende speech of our Chancellor is seems to be fading away, and this includes the delivery of heavy weapons and the long-lasting approval of the special budget of the armed forces, and also the 2% goal, which was announced for. And it also bears the risk that the rhetoric on the war is finally replaced by a paper tiger. And I mean, that is why it is interesting to have this panel with very interesting panelists. And I would like to thank Frank Ben Hodges, Max Inwo for their time and for the readiness to take part in this discussion with many people. Even though the political perspective is going to miss in this meeting, which we'll see in a way, right away, I'm still sure that this will be a very interesting event. For all the panelists, I wish you a lot of fun and a lot of inspiration for all the audience.
Ja, lieber David.
Dear David, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, thank you, Dr. Sirakov, for your kind introduction. I would also like to welcome everybody for our web talk, Germany's contribution to security in Europe. What shall we do? My name is Patrick Balz. I'm chairing the Hessen and Rheinland-Palatinate office of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation, and also on behalf of the Karl Hermann Flach Foundation and its chairman, Frank Blechschmidt. I would like to welcome you. We are cooperating with that foundation very often and with great interest. Thank you to Dr. Sirakov of the Atlantic Academy for this cooperation event. For many years, both institutions discussed again and again security matters in their portfolio. However, interest was rather low during long periods. And so I'm actually happy, although this is a sad moment, but I'm still happy to see that this discussion is now going into the public and that we are really sticking to it. The war in Europe also affected our foundation seriously because we had offices in Moscow and Kiev, many projects in Eastern European partner countries, which are all concerned right now. And we are accompanying the events on our website, also with our own blog, www.freiheit.org, where you can see, when you click on Krieg in Europa, you can see how a worldwide acting foundation is responding to this war. Let me also make a personal remark, because the war is also very autobiographic. In 2003, I was an exchange student in Ukraine, and I really experienced the spirit of liberty which was there. People were willing to become closer, to get closer to the West and to get away from the Russian Empire. And I could observe this way during 20 years with all the obstacles which were put up to this movement, and with the occupation of Crimea and the taking down of MH17 and all the activities of the Russian Federation, I also moved myself more and more towards political education, because I became aware how much influence was made on our democratic formation of our will. For me, this was an annoying situation, and really the Russian Empire was trespassing a limit. For me, that actually was the reason for starting political education, and it's also the reason for sitting here tonight. Since the 24th of Secretary, uninterruptedly and every day, I was really angry that Putin about what Putin was violating this country and the people just because he can. And when he arrived at the conclusion that he can do so, was actually the consequence of the European security politic, which terribly failed, which was unable to be credibly communicating to the outside world that would be a break of rules. And in general, our security policy was actually considered as a reminiscence of the past during many decades. They were actually smiling at this, what kind of a strange nationalism the Russians have. We have long since passed that stage in the west of Europe, and in Germany they were even thinking that by way of economic relationships, Russia could be mitigated in their appetite. But the result of this war and of the situation was different. So this change of times, which was announced by the German Chancellor, also indicated that it takes a security revolution in Germany, and that in revolutionary times, Lenin already asked the question, what shall we do, what to do? And I would like to discuss today what can be done in order to support Ukraine, not only militarily, but also politically and in the medium term. What has Germany to do in order to empower its own armed forces and providing it with capabilities to be able to provide a credible contribution to security in Europe, which is absolutely unequivocal for any enemy, to make clear that any attack on the Western Europe would be a bad idea. I'm happy to announce here Dr. Ulrike Franke and Lieutenant General Vitaik Ben Hodges. He is a former head of the USA Army in Europe. Dr. Agnes Strank-Zimmermann unfortunately can't be with us because she had an appointment which she could not skip. And she asked that our understanding she would have loved to be with us, and I would also have liked to listen to her here to this discussion. But it's also a symbol that, or a sign that you know or notice how important security policy is right now. The only positive side is that we have therefore more time for our Dr. Ulrike Franke, she's policy fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations in London. She works on questions of German and defense politics, which is exactly the subject, especially of the influence of new technologies such as drone and artificial intelligence. And I think most of you know her already of her podcast Sicherheitshalber, which she does together with the journalist Thomas Ewald and the two professors, Dr. Frank Sauer and Professor Dr. Carla Massera, reading or discussing security politics worldwide. And this is also my recommendation. Unless you know this podcast already, I just can recommend to you to listen to it. This is a real highlight in German discussion environment. Ben Hodges is the former Lieutenant General. He has just ended his career as a military. He was the commanding general of US Army Europe until 2017. Now he works for the think tank of the Center of European Policy Analysis in Washington, and he's also holder of the Pershing Chair. And what I like and think is fascinating about Ben Hodges is that he several times was really on the right track. In the discussion, when we discussed the future capabilities, what should we be able to do, he has always had a good idea. And already years ago, he pointed out that the Russian Federation was building up something with regard to military capabilities, and that they are doing so not with the reason. And in our last event in summer 2020, when we discussed the defense of the Baltic states and Slovakia, he also underpinned the central issue of logistics. And in an interview with Christian Amanpour, he also discussed the failure or could forecast the failure of any occupation of Kiev. And also recently, with the self-confidence of the expert, he told us that in late summer this year, the Russians will fail also in Donbass if we continue to support Ukraine. I hope that we will also be on the right track in this case. And in order to also give our colleagues on the panel the opportunity to keep track, we also invited Markus Pinois to be chairing this meeting today. He's reporting for Deutschlandfunk on security policy until 2016. He was a correspondent in Washington, so he's got everything it takes in order to really chair this discussion of our expert duo. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can use the FNA function for posting your questions, and we will try to answer your questions in the course of this evening, although we think it will not be possible, unfortunately, for all the questions coming in. Then let me also give you another advice, Dr. Frank Sauer, which I also mentioned briefly. Next week, on the 23rd of May, he will talk to journalist Werner Stielicke about the grammar of nuclear deterrence, because that's also very up-to-date. Whether we have to do everything because there's just a nuclear bomb in the background. We should not be desperate. We already have survived a full Cold War with a nuclear threat, but he will talk about how does deterrence work, how does decision-making work under such conditions of threat, and how can we learn to live with a bomb again. But now, we will speak about the short-term and medium-term contributions of Germany for European security. I'm incredibly happy that we are all together here. Thanks again to the whole panel and also to Dr. Sirakov of the Atlantic Academy. And Dr. Pinois, I'm now handing over to you, and we wish that we have a lot of inspiration from this evening. Thank you, Mr. Waltz, and thank you for introducing us. I'm very much looking forward to this evening, and I'm also very much looking forward to a vivid exchange of views. Mainly, we are going to talk about the contribution of Germany in increased deterrent strategy, and which should be the political role of Germany in the future, which is to be expected by our neighbors. Just let me remind you of the word of the former Polish foreign minister, that the idea that Germany could stand off would be much more unpleasant than any other functions Germany might have inside Europe. So we have to think of not whether we would reorganize ourselves, but how we should reorganize ourselves and reposition ourselves. And I would also, after the panels, after we have our opening round, I would like to ask the same question. If you just think of the last 8 weeks or 9 weeks, 10 weeks maybe, what have you learned since the beginning of the war against Ukraine? What are the convictions which you had already before have been confirmed by the situation, and where did you have to rethink? Let's start with Frau Franke. Yes, thank you very much, and a jolly good evening. Thanks God, we knew that this will be the first question, because indeed it's a question which is worth thinking of. I would answer by mentioning exactly 3 points. I would like to start with a subject which is close to my heart, and it's also a subject of my research. Then let's talk about Germany later. Now, my nerd research subject is, as many might know, are the drones, or which has been mentioned already in the introduction. And let me just tell you 3 sentences about use of drones in the Ukraine conflict. What we could see is that drones were, although relevant, were not a game changer. They were used by both sides, but in particular on the Ukraine side, we see military systems and civilian systems. So both systems which you can also buy in electronic markets, which were used in order to direct the attacks. Those drones are, of course, relevant because they have this recognition capability. They may stay in air for a long time. And of course, it's supporting the limited air space or air dominance of the Ukrainians. And what we could see is also that it's very important how you use those drones, and the Ukrainians have developed different ways of using drones in military environments, which is quite interesting. What was surprising to me, or was rather not surprising me, what surprised me indeed was that the Russians were weaker in that area than we thought, than we would have expected perhaps. It is of course known, I mean, I did know at least that the Russians, as compared with other militaries, were really investing in drones very lately, and the Soviet Union was rather strong, but Russia postponed the subject for a long time and only entered this in the recent years. But at least both for drone capabilities and defense against drones, they were really surprisingly bad. What did not surprise me is that we have these civilian drones also in the battlefield, which is quite interesting. It could be foreseen, however. Those were drones which originally had purely military drones, then they were used in civilian for civilian subject matters, and now again they have returned to military matters. And I was also not surprised again by this sensationalist headlines. Everybody tended to say, well, this is the game changer, drones are deciding this war. Well, this comes up every now and then, but it's very difficult to say that one system will win the war. I would not say, subscribe to that. Second thing is a basic geopolitical report. What we're seeing right now is that, especially on the geopolitical arena, very many things can change very quickly, and they will have long-term influence and impact. This is, of course, referring to the relationships with Russia, Germany, Russian relationships have profoundly changed, and this is certainly not going to be changed, no matter what the end of the war will be. Sweden and Finland, as far as we know, if Turkey is not blocking this, will enter NATO as a response to this. But they will become the 31st and 32nd member of NATO, which will also have an impact. And Germany, of course, they will spend 100 billions for the armed forces. Within half an hour, in one speech, the Chancellor of Germany puts aside many things which had been discussed for decades in Germany. All the aircraft and other weapon systems which are now going to be introduced. Well, let's wait and see what they are really doing. It has changed at least, and that Germany is also now discussing openly about security policy and defense policy. There is such interest, which I did not notice during the last years either. So was I surprised? No, actually not. But of course, you have to become aware of it again and again, especially the Germans, and especially my generation. We are not used to this due to the geopolitical development. We are used to that nothing happens, that everything goes on, and the general guidelines won't change, especially those which were born after 1989. They have to become aware again and again that history does not stop and that this political situation may change. And the last point regarding Germany, which indeed surprised me and a little bit also made me concerned, and still does, how much mistrust our allies might have towards Germany. We saw this already before the war started, before the 24th of February, where I really had calls from the Senate of the United States, of course, not by the senators, but by the staffers. They asked me, why are you blocking the situations towards Russia? And since then, the situation has not changed, not only in Washington, but also in the Baltic states, in Poland. There is an incredible amount of mistrust towards Germany. And what I think especially astonishing is that my impression is that in Berlin, this doesn't really go down. All the interviews given by Mr. Scholz is more or less about the same. He says, my allies, they trust me and everything, but that is definitely not my perception. It's also not the perception of other experts, and we have to be very careful in that respect. So that's why finally I would like to say our allies are very impatient regarding the German activities and actions, and they are increasingly angry about this. And of course, we have to encounter this very quickly. Thank you up to that point. Those were quite a lot of points worth discussing a bit later. Great, thank you. I can just confirm that myself as a correspondent on security policy must say that the expertise in my own publishing house is now asked for much more than it was the case before. Before that, I also was considered a nerd who is thinking in old-fashioned categories and who was clinging to a strange transatlantic relationship. And well, they said that is due to his personal biography. He studied in the US and he worked a lot in the Congress. But also the other way around, and that was quite encouraging to me, if I may say so. Many people approached me, many of my colleagues approached me and said, exactly during the last 3 months, they told me, Markus, we always thought you were just a strange guy, a nerd, but you were right in principle. I would not rule out that in Germany there is a learning process taking place. And I would like to hand over to Ben Hodges, our guest. Nice to have you here. What is your take on that? What did you find out? What are the 3 things which cross your mind when you just rethink the last 3 months?
So greetings, everyone from Bucharest. This is a huge privilege for me to participate tonight. I live in Frankfurt, but I still speak German as if I was 5 years old. So I apologize that I must go through a dolmetscher this evening. So the topic tonight is very important to me because Germany is the most important ally for the United States. Not always our favorite. It's not always a perfect relationship. But if you think strategically, Germany is the most important ally for the United States. It's because of its moral authority it has accumulated. It's because of its economic power, because of its geography that allows the United States to do so many different things. And so this is why my president took political risk last year under pressure from the US Congress to repair the relationship with Germany that had been so damaged during the Trump administration. But of course, as a result, he has high expectations that Germany will lead inside Europe. Now, I think most Americans are a little surprised, a little bit frustrated, a little confused at why Germany seems so reluctant to take a more active leadership role. I hear from German friends, I hear from my German wife's family, everybody, you know, well, it's our history, you don't understand all these different things. Of course, I understand the history and I can appreciate all that. But it seems to me that Germany, I'm saying this as an American who lives in Frankfurt, but still an outsider, that Germany is confused about itself, that you don't know what role you should play in the world. There's a reluctance to talk about leadership. There's a reluctance to be more active in putting forth, this is what we're going to do. I think Germany, in a strange way, lacks self-confidence about itself. It's almost as if you don't trust yourself to have a strong military, a strong foreign policy, and to be the example. This is what the United States needs from our German ally. This is what I think Europe needs from our German ally. Let me talk specifically about Ukraine now for just the last couple of minutes. Russia has already lost. No matter what happens in the next few months, Russia has already lost. Every objective that the Kremlin put forward, they have failed to achieve. Sweden and Finland are applying officially to join NATO. So the one thing that President Putin said he wanted to prevent, he has actually created because of this unprovoked attack on Ukraine. It was very important that our defense minister, Secretary Austin, said that we are going to help Ukraine win. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 20 years. Not one time did any American president ever say, we're going to win. This is so important when the administration puts a specific objective to win. Soldiers do better, and we apply resources in a much better way. What does win mean? It means that Russia is out of all Ukrainian sovereign territory. That's what win means. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, but I do believe that the Russian forces are going to culminate, that they're going to collapse by August, and that Ukrainian forces will go over to the offense, and that they will push Russian forces back to the line of 23 February. And then over time, if we remain committed, then Russian forces will leave Crimea and Donbass. So it's two parts. The third point, and I'm sure this will come up in the question, so I won't go into it too much, but of course the concern is about what will Putin do? He's not going to surrender. What happens as this Russian forces collapse? What will he do? Will he use a nuclear weapon? I always take these threats serious. He is brutal. He does not care about human life, but he is not crazy. He is not wahnsinnig. He will not, I do not believe that he will use nuclear weapons in any circumstance as long as the Russian state itself is not threatened. There's zero battlefield advantage. There's no good thing that comes out of for Russia if they use a nuclear weapon. It would be impossible for the United States and other allies to stay out of this if he uses a nuclear weapon. And so, but if he does, the response will not necessarily be a nuclear response. I would predict it would be a non-nuclear response, but still one that would devastate Russian land forces and the Black Sea Fleet inside Ukraine. So I'm optimistic, no nuclear weapon, Ukrainian sovereignty eventually restored, and democracy is defended, and the gesamte europäische Friedensordnung is restored. Germany has a key role in this.
Vielen Dank, Ben Hodges, für diese Einschätzung zunächst einmal. Jetzt möchte ich mal, es soll ja heute
Thank you, Ben
besonders
Hodges, for this event. Today we want to speak about what Germany has to do and what can the German contribution be. My impression is that they are just confusing themselves in an unnecessary debate, and this is somewhat depending on the hesitating attitude of the Chancellor, whether to supply Marder tanks or ammunition, or whether anti-tank or anti-aircraft tanks can be delivered, whether there is ammunition for them at all, and why Leopard 1 tanks are standing around somewhere in a garage and can't be supplied, and whether the behavior of the ambassador of Ukraine is acceptable or not, or reasonable or not. These are all debates which remain without a result. Frau Franke, what do you think what Germany should do concretely? What is expected of Germany, but what can we do?
Well, I do agree to what you said, that Germany has somehow lost track, and also the Ukrainian ambassador, and the question of whether the President Steinmeier goes to Ukraine or not, and whether he was not invited. So this is not helpful to discuss about this. But what Germany has to do better in every way is to improve its communication. I'm really critical as regards certain things. I come back to that, but I'm particularly critical about the fact how poorly the federal the public and government has communicated what it has done, because more weapons were delivered. There is an incredible support, financial and economic support. Of course, Germany supports Ukraine, but it was so poorly communicated that sometimes really you had the impression that Germany was particularly strongly standing on its brakes. But secondly, Germany has to stop breaking the processes. I think it was so absurd that so often the federal chancellor said something like the following: we have, or we shouldn't go on any sole pathway. We want and should be together with the allies. And that was always in a situation where the allies had already started to move. But Germany was the only country that was still breaking the processes. So, okay, he said, we don't want to do anything alone, but they shouldn't be the ones who break all the processes, also in terms of weapon deliveries. In the meantime, I really have to tell you that I'm not really convinced any longer of the fact that Germany really is prepared for a geopolitical leadership role in Europe. It sounds sad. I've been telling you for years that it should be that way, but I don't see really it happening. And where I work, we also made some surveys that Germany is expected to do great things in terms of economics, but not in terms of leadership, also vis-a-vis China. And in so far, really, I'm pretty, I have lost my ambitions in this respect. I would rather say Germany shouldn't break processes, but communicate better what it does. And the leadership role, I don't know really. Maybe one has to admit that France and Macron had bigger and greater ideas. But if you don't can do it, but maybe Ben is convinced that more can be done. Let's ask him, Mr. Hodges. An American president, that was Mr. Bush Sr. in 1990, he said that Germany as a partner in leadership, well, he saw Germany as a partner in leadership. Do you think that this will one day come true?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there are so many intelligent, educated, confident Germans that I know from my years in the Army and now the 4 years I've lived in Frankfurt. So that's why I'm confident that eventually Germany will rediscover its self-confidence. And I think Ulrike makes an excellent point. Most German people and most Americans and others have no idea of all the positive things that Germany does. Germany was the third largest troop contributor in Afghanistan. Nobody knew that. And Germany was the first nation to deploy the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group after the Warsaw Summit in 2006, the first one. That was huge. I talked to a group of German university students at the Goethe-Uni last year. They had no idea. They didn't even know that German soldiers were deployed to Lithuania as part of a NATO mission. And these were students in a foreign relation, in an international relations class, and they had no idea. And then I think Ulrike is exactly right. All the momentum, all the positive feelings that came out of the Zeitenwende, the announcement of the 100 milliarden and the 2% and all that was immediately wasted or lost because of the mixed messages that came out about what should Germany do about Ukraine. These got mixed together, talking about 5,000 Gefechtshelm, and it made no sense. And then the discussion about the martyrs, whether or not to deliver armored vehicles to Afghanistan. There's actually a very good reason why Germany can't do that. The numbers that came from the Bundeswehr, I completely trust those numbers. The problem is that every day and inside 1 week, there was a different explanation. Oh, the Ukrainians will never learn how to use this, or we need them for our NATO mission, or we don't have any. And so because you get a different explanation every time, people get frustrated and you don't have any confidence in what you're hearing. Actually, what the Bundeswehr said about the martyrs is that they have enough to equip 4 of the 9 Panzer Grenadier battalions. Germany is in the process of transitioning from the Martyr, which is old technology, to the new technology, Puma. So 4 battalions still have Martyr. 1 battalion has Puma. The other 4 battalions do not have anything because the Puma, the transition is not ready yet. And yet Germany must fill requirements for NATO. So the Bundeswehr was correct when they said, we don't have martyrs to give up. And of course, because of the transition from one technology to a new technology, there's no supply chain to do repairs on the old martyrs. So they have to cannibalize to use the vehicles to repair the ones that they still have. Now, the political side is different. The political side could say, we could ask NATO, if we really wanted to give 1 battalion of Martyr to Ukraine, we could go to NATO and say, if you relieve us of this mission, then we can provide Martyr. But that's a political decision. That's not a decision for the Bundeswehr. This is what I mean by lack of self-confidence, that you can't speak clearly, decisively, this is what we're going to do. This is why it's important. Now, again, as an outsider, I don't claim to be an expert on the Deutsche Grundgesetz, but I do know that human dignity is the very first part, the priority in the German Constitution. To me, it is so obvious that if this is the priority for German people, how in the world can you not boldly and decisively step forward and say what's happening to Ukrainian people, a young democracy, not a perfect democracy, but a young democracy? Why would we not do everything possible to defend that? This is what I think is missing.
Vielen Dank für Ihre Worte, Ben Hodges. Sie sind ein guter
Many thanks for your words. You are a good friend of Germany, even though you are taking a critical analysis. May it be, Ulrike Franke, that Ben Hodges is such a good friend that partly he overlooks that it is not just some errors of communication and a lack of self-confidence, but that there is the political attitude standing behind, that the Federal Chancellor and the SPD try to do the one thing, but only half-heartedly, without letting the other thing go completely, so that they try to find a way out and not wholeheartedly getting into that support mode. One can see that in the coalition, this led to difficulties. Greens and FDP have completely different views, and they communicate also differently than the SPD Federal Chancellor. What is your view on that? Well, I think that is a good working hypothesis. Let me put it this way. Well, I'm partly lost because there are different parts of the government, and they have different styles of clear communication. I have the impression that the Greens, Habeck and Baerbock, they do communicate and discuss quite well internally the dilemmas, why things are difficult, and they take the population along. And I think this is very important because the population is lacking quite a deal of and a lot of geopolitical understanding. So the Green ministers, I think they explain things quite well and convincingly. Well, the federal government or chancellor, I don't understand. So in the chat, I also read often, do they have poor advisors or what? I don't really know. As an observer from the outside, I cannot say that I would know more than the advisors and counselors in the federal chancellery. I don't know what the reason is. Maybe it's because they do not admit and that they know things, or maybe the federal chancellor belongs to those who do not yet understand and do not want to understand that certain things have fundamentally changed. And maybe there's still the hope, oh, well, everything is very bad, but maybe we get back to the normal situation, in inverted commas, when it gets to the relationship to Putin, Russia, change by trade, etc., that they do not want to give it up. I do understand this because it is so difficult to change a paradigm and a way you see the world, but you would have to. And I thought that this speech of the Zeitenwende was this push and that moment when he had understood it, but obviously it has not yet happened. But I must confess that I do also have a big question mark. I cannot answer it. I think you can only understand it once you have a look at the internal situation at the SPD. The learning curve of the Greens was extremely steep, and that is why during the elections in North Rhine-Westphalia they were they got the benefits from that. And you see what the use is of a value-oriented explanation is good for. Question to our audience. We do have quite a number of questions. I would like to ask you for your convenience that we cannot answer all. Winfried Bergman asked the question, why does Germany have to take a geopolitical leadership role? Wouldn't it be better in an alliance with several European countries to go on jointly? For me, this is too martial, this discussion. Ben Hodges, what do you respond to that?
So we know from history, and I respect the question. I think I understand it, and certainly my older German friends that were children of the war, you know, that they have a memory of their houses being destroyed by the Allied bombing in Berlin, or having to escape Görlitz from the Red Army in 1945. So I can understand and respect why people would be very uneasy about this. But I also think that for the first time in history, Germany has only friends on every border. There's no enemy or potential enemy anywhere on Germany's border. And so in the last several years, Germany got very comfortable. You had people became wealthy. You have a wonderful social system, which is the envy of many other countries of the world. And that's possible because you don't have to spend, or you're not spending money on defense like most everybody else is. And I think that we know from history, from thousands of years of history, that the best way to prevent conflict is to show that you are prepared for conflict. And what are we doing right now? We, the collective we, did nothing after Russia invaded Georgia. We, led by the United States, failed to respond when the Syrians under Assad, with the support of Russia, used chemical weapons against their own people. We did nothing. Even though President Obama said there was a red line, we did nothing. And then the Russians invade Crimea in 2014, a European country, and we did nothing. There were some minor sanctions, but those were a joke. That did nothing to change behavior. So here we are now in a war on the European continent where thousands of innocent people are being killed intentionally not accidents. We make accidents. The Russians are targeting, murdering innocent people, European country. And we were too slow to respond because of this past 20 years of appeasement, of hoping that, oh, you know, we don't want to provoke Russia. Everything they've done was unprovoked. So this is, if somebody thinks that I'm being too martial, it's because I care about protecting innocent people.
Wie das alte lateinische Sprichwort sagt, si vis pacem para bellum.
As si vis pacem para bellum, if you want peace, then prepare for war. This is an evil reality, but Putin brought it back to our minds. That much about the question from our audience, Mr. Bergmann. Now I've got a question. Maybe Ulrike Franke can answer it from Markus Schäfer. So he asked the basic question, whether Germany should do more. I actually ask myself what Germany can do more, because the arms industry is, its capacities is used up for years. This is certainly correct. And so far, I must say that what Germany should do is to a large extent what Germany currently does. And that is what I meant by communication. Actually, what Germany has to do is to stand behind Ukraine clearly in its communication, to help economically, financially, and that's actually what we do. Basically, we do that. There are still some deficits, but I think we are going in the right direction. But the problem is that it was such a fight, such a struggle to get to that point, that the positive aspects were also lost. Also with our allies. I think the gentleman who rose the question is absolutely right. There are only certain things that can be done. It would certainly be a great step. And I must say, as a security politician, I think it is very difficult. As a security politician, I can completely fade out the economic repercussions, but what actually would be crucial is the embargo. Hungary is still against the embargo. Enemy, we could really set a sign, but I can, as an energy or economy layperson, it's really hard to say whether we can do that or not. But I do see that it is difficult for the government to decide that. Very briefly, I think it is so important, isn't it, too martialistic? I have heard that for many years. Every time I spoke about military, everybody was telling me, why do we speak about military things all the time? What is really important to me is to highlight that these military weapon deliveries in Germany, they came really last. We tried all sorts of negotiations and economic ways, not only the Germans, but Europeans as well. But weapons for Germany that only become an issue for us when bombs had already been thrown on Ukraine. And then so far, one cannot really say that there would be a large-scale martial discussion. I think this is not really true. The federal government, I do not want to let it go so easily. They do what they can, and we provide economic aid and budgets, but there are already 100 Leopard tanks, and we could deliver them within weeks that are not within the Bundeswehr stocks, and that would not pose all the problems as they were explained by Ben Hodges with regard to the Marder tanks. So the question here is, why doesn't anything happen here? and also in view of the fact the SPD parliamentary head of SPD, Wolf Mütze, is not a serious enemy of this policy. One might ask oneself, isn't there a deliberate postponement, and is it maybe not only poor communication, but is there a certain tactic to be always the last one to confront Putin regarding a future negotiation solution with Putin in order to get back and to hope for a rapprochement to Putin as we had it before the war? So this is suspicion rather comes to my mind looking at what happened in the past few weeks and months. Isn't this a much bigger concern? Yes, I share your evaluation. Prior to the 24th of February, the German policymakers spoke of a special relationship with Russia compared to other countries in Europe, and therefore one could have and exert a particular influence on Russia. And I said, if that is the case, then please do so. Yes, it was said we have the gas pipelines and economic connections to exist, and therefore we can exert an influence. And I had the impression either you don't do it or it doesn't work. What you say that due to these connections, you would have a bigger influence. Maybe it is similar now that they still say to themselves, well, one could have and take a different position. And well, I'm not knowing SPD well enough, but maybe there is really a lack of convictions within the SPD, and maybe it is very difficult for some people in that party to overthrow positions that they have had for decades. But this is what has to happen if there are such geopolitical changes and such a new situation is coming up. Then the cards are newly mixed, and you have to think about what stands to take, and that is currently taking place. And maybe strategic thinking is not something that was particularly trained over the past decades in Germany, and that is the result now. Herbert Klein asked the question, why do you focus so much on Germany? Crucial is the role of the US. This is correct on the one hand, but it's also problematic on the other hand. Ben Hodges, that the US always has to take the role, the leading role for the Europeans, not only for the Germans, that they currently also play, and also prior to the outbreak of the war, Joe Biden managed to bring all the allies together. It was an incredible diplomatic effort, and we have got the German and Europe friendliest American administration and executive that we have had for many years. But we should be aware of the fact that this does not always need to be the case. Mr. Trump showed that. How urgent is it for Germany to empower itself, to be able to act independently and to defend independently? Can you explain that generally?
So I was horrified by the Trump administration on so many different things. The total lack of respect for NATO, the constant public criticism of our ally, and a obvious lack of understanding of the importance of having allies and why we are in Europe, and that the United States, we don't have the luxury just to focus on one threat, China, but that we have to deal with multiple threats, because American prosperity is tied directly to European prosperity, and European prosperity depends on European security and stability. So even if not one country paid €1 for their own defense, it's still in the interest of the United States that Europe is stable, secure, and prosperous. Plus the access in Germany in particular, but not only Germany, to have wonderful Ramstein Air Base and our soldiers in Kaiserslautern and so on, Baumholder and so on. So the Trump administration really caused damage. And of course, there's the possibility that he or somebody like him could come back. So we have, the United States is vulnerable. We are vulnerable to disinformation. Our people are losing confidence in the Congress. They lose confidence in the Supreme Court now. And so President Biden is working very hard to help restore confidence in these important institutions, these pillars of a liberal democratic society. And obviously, I'm hoping that he is successful. I will say that the effort by him and Secretary Blinken was the best example of American diplomacy I have seen probably since 1995 at the time of the Dayton Peace Accord. I mean, this was the best example of consultation working with allies, where the priority was to build cohesion between US, Germany, UK, France, Netherlands, Italy, Poland, Norway, everybody. And I think the Kremlin was surprised by this. I think they did not expect Germany and the US to be so close and working together in the last months. And of course, they're going to do everything they can to break that apart, to put pressure. I mean, you know, in the US, there are millions of Americans that watch Fox News that openly ask the question, why do we care about Ukraine? So they are illiterate in terms of understanding strategy and policy. So this is we are in a conflict. So if I'm critical of Germany, I'm not unaware of the problems that we have in the United States. At the end of the day, it's going to take both together. Exactly what the President George H.W. Bush said, partners in leadership. This is what he was talking about. And President Gauck, I heard President Gauck just a few years ago. He said, friends have higher expectations of friends, when he was unhappy with the US about some things that we were doing. I'll never forget him saying that.
Darf ich die Frage noch aus deutscher Perspektive beantworten?
Ja, ne, bitte.
Ganz kurz, weil ich würde halt...
Short answer from the German perspective. Two responses. Why do we speak about Germany, and isn't the US more important? First of all, very basically, we as the Germans and as a German society, we have to talk much more about what we want to do, what we can do, what our own military capabilities, what our deterrent capabilities can do. I think it is extremely dangerous to say others would do it for us, even if this is the case, but it can't be that we say, well, we are one of the biggest economies in the world, one of the strongest countries and the biggest country in Europe, and we say, oh no, well, it's not really relevant geopolitically, we just leave it to our American allies. Well, I think this is a problematic approach generally. But in addition to that, the US, they have every interest to orient away from Russia and Europe. It doesn't mean that they will withdraw people from Europe. And Ben is showing us and giving a good example that the US will and cannot withdraw from Russia. But the US, they do focus much more on China and the Pacific, and they do not really feel like bothering about the US. And I could imagine, particularly now, where the Russian military has only had moderate success, it does not mean that there wouldn't be thousands of people dying, but militarily they are much weaker than we all thought. And it could also be that Europe, okay, you can do your deterrence just by yourself.
What do you think? People are trusting in allied systems in the interest of their security on both sides of the Atlantic, but there are also people which I would just combine under the term of isolationism. And I think this is going to continue to be a fight. You have just mentioned China and the fact that the US are actually focusing now more on Asia. And I would like to add one question for Ben Hodges, which comes from Sam Danny, who says, if you don't have a geopolitical leadership role in Europe, which you can expect, what could a future foreign policy look like instead? Have you any idea about that?
Ohne eine deutsche, wie auch immer geartete,
without any German leadership role, whatever it shall be, maybe some kind of a European cooperation, but can this really be true? Is there such a thing like a geopolitical leadership role without Germany? Or Frau Franke has just said she can't imagine that Germany can accept such a role.
Well, this is why the Biden administration has put so much emphasis onto repairing the relationship with Germany, because we also cannot imagine a Europe where Germany just sits on the sidelines as a Zuschauer, instead with, I mean, think of the hypocrisy. Think of the hypocrisy. After the war, Germans have done more to atone for their history or to try and repair damage. I mean, everywhere I turn, I see the Stolpersteiner all around Frankfurt where I live. Constantly the talk about the Holocaust. And so never again, all of these things. And so that Germany has earned a moral authority because of the last 70 years. No other army in the world has a Zentrum für innere Führung. Nobody has that. This is unique to the Bundeswehr. So, and you talk about European values, and Germany is the champion of European values. So this is the expectation. And I think there is a large degree of hypocrisy now in Germany where people talk about this, and we can't give weapons to Ukraine because we don't want to cause a provocation. And then there's a law against giving weapons to a combat zone. But for some reason, there was no problem with selling weapons to Egypt, and who's fighting a war against Yemen, and providing huge amounts of weapons in other countries. So it seems like a hypocrisy that you don't want to provoke or do anything that would spoil this very, very lucrative relationship with Russia. And so the danger is that Germany loses credibility, that after a while, Poland, Greece, other countries in the EU become a little bit weary of lectures about values from Berlin.
Zum Schluss, ich merke schon, wir sind...
Finally, I noticed that all the time we have been discussing a lot about the mentality, about the consciousness which should change, and a lot of questions from the audience also show that they are uncertain of what is coming up around. Let me just come back to a very prosaic thing. Today it seems to be prosaic, but 3 months ago it was a revolution. The German Chancellor provided 100 billion of euros for the armed forces. He announced that more than 2% of the GDP will be paid for weaponry for our external security. Is that enough, or is it rather just a good start? Let me just with you, Ben Hodges, and then I will finally also give the floor to Ulrike.
So I think this decision was made by the Chancellor, the Bundeskanzler, as a result to repair the shortcomings from the past 15 years. So the 100 milliarden is to catch up. I have a friend, he's a young soldier in the Bundeswehr, and he described his equipment to me, his personal Ausrüstung. He said it's terrible. Only a small percentage of the Bundeswehr has a proper helmet. Even the cold weather clothing, he said, is terrible. I was astounded. I would have never thought that in the German Bundeswehr that the Kleidung for cold weather would not be the best you could have. Basic things. And this is a result of over a decade of low priority to provide the right equipment. And look, I think it's impressive that no German Bundeswehr soldier ever goes anywhere without the mandate from the Bundestag. Every mission is approved by the Congress, by the Bundestag. Then it seems to me there's a moral obligation of the Bundestag to make sure that every woman and man of the Bundeswehr has the best possible equipment so that they can survive and so that they can accomplish the mission. If you're going to give a mandate to go on an Einsatz, then you should make sure that you've given these women and men the best possible equipment. And that has not been the case for the last 15 years. And so this 100 milliarden is going to help catch up on that. The 2% part, that's to maintain readiness, modernization, all the things that you would expect from the country that should be doing so much to help ensure stability and peace and defending European values, democratic values in Europe.
Frau Dr. Franke, Sie haben das Schlusswort
Dr.
jetzt.
Franke, you have the last word. What's your take? Is that enough? Is it just the right thing? Is it a good start? Or would you say it's a promise which they can't keep? What is relatively clear is that I think there is no military in the world which would say it's enough. Even in the US, which really spend a lot of money and as a percentage, but also in nominal terms. And yet there are people saying that it's all not enough and the US have to do something totally different in order to catch up. Because it's always easy to say it's not enough. And there are a lot of arguments which say the 200 million or the 100 million will not be enough, or the 2% will not be enough. The other thing is the 2% are actually a NATO thing. And this is just a virtual idea. We always take this as a goal and we think if we do that, that's it. But these 2% were just thought about in the NATO. They did not say that this will be enough. The question is, what for? It's always depending on the context. And of course, in the Cold War, defense budget of the Federal Republic of Germany was clearly above 2% because they were hoping more than 3 even. So it has to be adjusted to the context. Therefore, I would say the following. I'm pretty sure that this is a very good start. And as Ben has just pointed out, it's for the Bundeswehr really important to catch up, to fill the gaps, to get back to a full equipped army. It's a good idea. Every soldier should also have a weapon at his hand. That was the peace dividend of Germany, that we did not do this. And so it's extremely necessary. And it's a very important step. Will it be enough? Well, it depends very much on the context. It's nothing. It's not a huge amount of money where one could say this will cover everything. Unfortunately, this is not the case. And each year, the discussion will have to go on. And we have to see what the situation of threat will be like. And of course, I'm not taking the position to say that it's all never enough. I think it's a lot of money, and it's good that they take this money into their hands and want to spend it on the military, but it's not the end of the story. Okay, we have a lot of questions which have not been discussed, such as the question for a European army, whether this makes sense within NATO at all. All that is, of course, more far-reaching. There are questions regarding the attitude of Chancellor Scholz with regard to weapon supplies to Ukraine. I mean, certainly in the course of, or in the framework of the Atlantic Academy, and also in the framework of the Naumann Foundation, we will have a lot of events where we are going to talk about this. Just get information what is out there. You can get more advice on other events in our chat. I would like to thank particularly to our guests tonight, Dr. Franke. She is connected from London, if I'm not mistaken, and also Lieutenant General retired Ben Hodges, who is calling from, or is connected from Bucharest. Thank you very much for being with us. I would especially address you as an American citizen. Thank you a lot to have you here. And we are very much looking forward always to your advice, and would tell the other people in the audience, please look online where you get more information. At least as I am concerned, I would like to end this evening, and I would like to wish you a good night. Goodbye.